Welcome, welcome, guys. We are back for another episode of The Lock-In. Joining me, as per usual, is Irish poker legend Dara O'Kearney. Dara, I noticed this week your book, Poker Satellite Strategy, has been, I had to make sure I get the right one there. It is Poker Satellite Strategy, has been translated into German by our very good friend, Christian Zetsche, live tournament reporter extraordinaire. Congratulations on that. And can you tell us a little bit about what might happen?
Yeah, I'm delighted it's finally finished. I mean, Christian came to us last year and said he wanted to do it, and we thought, well, there's no better man for the job. He knows poker inside out, and he's a workhorse. We've been kind of disappointed on the workhorse element, I have to say. he started this back in May, so that basically means he took longer to translate it into German than we took to write it. It's also worth noting that about 6 weeks ago, the Italians started translating the other book, PKO Poker Strategy, and they actually completed before he did. So.
Wow, calling out Christian here, who is probably the hardest working person I've ever come across. But I'm guessing that given these translating into German, he's probably inventing new words.
Well, he is. This is the thing. Like he said, there was just a list of terms that there's no German word for. I think the one he talked about was fold equity. He said like the nearest thing to it was essentially folding up a banknote, which is not really the same thing. No. So he kind of had to either invent new words or he had to just make the decision to go with the English phrase, which kind of like, I mean, we all know that anytime you're at the Rio or wherever and you hear Europeans talking in their language about poker, it tends to be words we don't understand, fold equity, words we don't understand, pocket jacks, words we don't understand, Irish fish. So there are certain words they just take across and use, except the French. The French seem to have a word for absolutely everything.
Indeed they do. Well, look, joining us today, Dara and I are really happy to have this man on. He's a good pal of ours. He's a bit of a legend as well. Online OG, MILLION Rio champion, end boss of Super Tuesday. I don't know how many times you won that one. And of course, more recently, the PPL leaderboard champion, which I think when you were last on the show or when you were on the other show, the podcast show, you were on the cusp of winning. But of course, you have completed that victory now. Marty Mathis, welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me today. It's really cool to join. I've been looking forward to this kind of format where we can kind of talk more freely. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, really looking forward to having you on that. And also, I guess my first question is to do with that PPL leaderboard. You won a stupid amount of them. I'm wondering if you've spent them all yet.
Yeah, so actually, I would say I spent the last of them probably around, I think it's the last of them. I think I completed them by like May or June of this year. So it was actually pretty easy to spend them online. Like COVID was kind of a blessing in that I didn't know how I was going to spend those things, like going to all these live tournaments.
Yeah.
There really weren't a lot of high stakes tournaments on the thing. And I couldn't use them for the Triton events just to get rid of them all at once. And so I really wasn't looking forward to a year traveling around to like 12 to 15 live stops. So I mostly used them on like 215 million tickets when Party was running that. I played a lot of the satellites to Millions World because the first 100 people that won a seat also won a seat to the main. And that got transferred over.
No need to be doing an advertisement for one of our rival sites here, Marty.
Yeah.
We get it.
Yeah, I'll keep that.
Anyway, talk about that much.
Anyway, they were very easily spent, basically.
It is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was obviously good for you that you were able to use them online. Probably maybe one of the few upsides of the pandemic is that all those people who had built up lots of PPL were able to use them. But yeah, I mean, again, not to heap praise on one of our rivals too much, but that was an amazing promotion by Party.
It was.
Yeah, it really was.
Dara, I managed to get about 36k of them, and I think that was just about enough to dust them all off in one weekend in Barcelona, as I recall. You had about 100k though. Did you manage to spend yours?
Yeah, I spent mine. I had no problem spending mine. They were long gone by the time the COVID hit. I actually started the grind not quite late, but I think it was August when I started, a couple of months in. So I never really seriously chased the leaderboard. I think I ended up coming 13th or 14th, somewhere around there, but miles behind the Marty and the other guys who were up there. But yeah, I mean, like a really great promotion. Even getting into the top 100 was worth quite a bit. From what I remember, like 100 got an extra 5k, I think it was.
It was 5k. I had a friend exactly on the bubble, and he won it in the last 215. So it was a 215 to 2k. So he was on a 7k bubble, and it was just, he was so high stressed. It was the last one of the entire period, and he ended up making it, but it was. was pretty intense. So
Not,
obviously
wait,
satellites
not
were
to
good.
mention all the extra money that Dara got because everybody had to start buying his book and
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. He even got me to buy it.
It was amazing that satellite it was really good timing, because I mean, my whole reason for writing the satellite book was like, well, I don't really play satellites that much anymore because they're not really that big a thing online. And then suddenly they just explode. So like on the one hand, I felt good because book sales, but on the other hand, it was like, yeah, but now I have kind of let the secrets out. And actually on that front, I do remember like one of the first reviews we got on Amazon was from Marty, and I remember I just got really, really excited, and Barry was like, why are you so excited by this review? And I was like, you have to realize who Marty is. Like, this is somebody that people will take seriously. He's probably going to end up winning this leaderboard. So yeah, thanks to Marty for that. That was amazing for us.
Yeah. But so going back to the subject of satellites, do you kind of feel like it's kind of coming full circle now? So there was kind of a boom in satellites to the point where you could win a lot of tournament dollars, multiple seats. And as far as I know, when looking at sites now, I really couldn't find a satellite focused grind anymore if I wanted to. I think they could still be good filler, but with like the policy changes at GG where the second seat, like you don't win the rake, or like not being able to win multiple seats, or there's no PPL, or I guess Party has like but it's not the same liquidity the games once had. So I was a full-time satellite grinder for 9 months basically, and that just couldn't be the case anymore as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree very much with that. It's not quite as low. The lowest point for me was when Stars changed their policy and didn't allow multiple wins, and then really the bottom seemed to fall out of the market then. But it was kind of coming anyway because satellites had reached a point where there were so many grinders grinding them that actually the recreations were getting squeezed out, and that was the reason for Stars' change. So there's always this difficult balancing act for the sites. On the one hand, they would love to encourage the old $T system and have everybody grinding them, but when they do that, they do get in the specialists like all three of us here basically, and then the recreational players get squeezed out. So yeah, I think it's always going to go in waves. Where, and I have heard rumors that some of the other sites are possibly going to reintroduce the idea of $T and multiple wins. So I think sites will continually go back and forth in this.
Back and forth and see what works best. And obviously I can understand like satellites seem like the game that you want to protect recreational players in the most. Yeah. Because I feel like the whole dream to poker is that moneymaker-esque type. I played an $86 satellite online and I turned it into $2.5 million. That's what people want.
Yeah, I do remember somebody in Stars telling me that like at the worst point, they found that about 50% of the people playing the satellites to live events were what they would classify as grinders like us, but about 90% of the seats being won were coming from that group. So that's a disastrous situation then for the other 50% who are recreational.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Well, we are nothing if not balanced on this show. We've commended Party Poker on their excellent promotion from a year ago or whatever it was, and now I believe we have some criticism courtesy of you, Marty.
I was playing a satellite last week. I was playing a 109. I wasn't aware, and then I won the 109 satellite, and I was just surprised to see I sat down in like $1,000 plus 100.
Ouch.
And I was just kind of like taken aback. Like I know on GG they have some tournaments. Maybe they charge like a 0.5% admin fee when they like sub-license their events or whatever to like the APL or whatever they're doing. Sometimes they pass the buck to the customer. They did it for the WSOP circuit. There was a small admin fee on the prize. But I was on Party and I was really surprised to see the double rake. And I recently heard someone talking who's like quite a better poker player than me. I was hearing Ike talk about what he thought his expectation was in like $1,000 tournaments, these big 1K tournaments. And I would assume him to be like the top caliber player, and he was saying that probably win at about 20% ROI. Like anybody who thinks they win it much more than that is being unrealistic. And so I'm definitely not as good of a player as him. And if you're I just, like, where is my ROI in a 1K with like double the rake? So I just probably like I played the satellite. I lost the tournament. I didn't choose to re-enter. Whereas I feel like normally I could be in that thing for 6 bullets, but I was just didn't like it. You know what I mean?
You seem to be upset by this, Marty. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You need an emotional support animal with the double rake. It is bad, by the way. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I mean, it is what it is. Costs go up; they're never going down.
Yeah, I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that live poker hasn't gone away, or live poker has gone away at the moment, and they've moved a lot of series on, and they're treating big online festivals like live events, and now we're paying live rake. Live players are used to playing 10% on a 1K. Yeah. Online players definitely are not.
And obviously, I understand we get some rewards and rake back, and so it's not the exact cost. And obviously, if you play more, you get more back.
To be fair to Party, they do have one of the better rake back systems. So.
Yeah, definitely. And it just seems weird though, because you say like we're playing live tournaments online now, and maybe if this was the CPP online, or if this was, or the WPT online, where they probably have like a licensing agreement and they split costs.
Yeah, they have to pay, and they have to
Millions
pay.
Online. This is their brand, and it like I don't know. I was just kind of thrown off.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy to say that the Unibet Open, which will be happening in a few weeks' time, is a 1050 plus 50, which I think is very fair, considering that is a very soft one as well. So hopefully you'll play that, Marty, will you?
I would love to, but Unibet, I tried to sign up a couple times. They do not accept people from Mexico.
Oh no, that's right. That's not one of our territories. We bring this to the important people here and say we need to make a special Mexico dispensation. And
I would love to play on there. So in full transparency, let me go ahead and tell you what I did. So I was like, I think I can get by the Unibet security just by talking to them. I just need to set up an account. So yeah, I just need to set up the account. So I just enter my normal address, but instead of like picking a country, I just went to the first one, which is, I guess, what a lot of people do on GG. So I was from Albania.
Right.
So I get to the deposit stage and like my account's locked. I have like an email, I contact support, and obviously they want my ID with my Albanian address, like where I live. And reasonable thing to ask.
Know your
and
customer.
That's basically where I was like, well, I'm not really from Albania. Can you get me in there? From Mexico, and it was a no-go. So I tried, because I love to play on a lot of, like, I'm playing a lot across a lot of different networks, and I really like to spread out the poker action. So I would have loved to give Unibet a try. I think that's the only poker site besides like Sky Poker. I would say Unibet's probably like the highest liquidity site that I don't have access to, besides WSOP or like region locked sites.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Like, ironically, when David and I started as ambassadors, David was already living in Malta. I was living in Ireland, and after we signed, we discovered that Ireland was also one of those countries that Unibet wasn't registered in. So I actually couldn't play on Unibet despite being an ambassador. But for the first year or so, probably the biggest email I used to get from people was Irish people saying, I signed up, Ireland wasn't on the list, so I put myself down as Iran, which was the next nearest to it. And then they froze my account.
Story checks out.
Yeah.
Story does check out indeed. Okay, well, we're going to segue from, I guess, Party Poker to a Party Poker ambassador. Patrick Leonard has just released a Run It Once MTT course, which I'm expecting big things from, I got to be honest. Pads, if you like. Perfecting analysis, decisions, and strategy is what he's called it. 170 hours of video. 170 videos, 80 hours in that course. And Patrick has promised that he will continue to add videos every month. Before this little segment we're doing here today, I actually got in contact with Pads because I wanted to get a little soundbite from him to just explain what's going on. I asked him about taking time away from the felt, from playing to put work in of this nature. And he told me it was a nice project to do over lockdown. I always spend November, December playing less and studying more, and always start January, February doing the same. I've never been to PCA, never been to Aussie Millions, because I think starting the year well is important, even if that means being locked up in the office instead of on a beach. For me, like, it just seems like he is one of the absolute elite online players, and for him to maybe be pulling back the curtain, revealing stuff, I was like, well, wow, like surely there's something he's going to hold back here. So maybe, you know, once you get into the really high end stuff, he's going to maybe not give away those trade secrets. But he was pretty insistent that he was giving everything away. And he said that, you know, occasionally now something comes into his mind and he goes, oh, fuck, I should have done that. I'll put a video out about it next week. So you're getting a pretty big library of informative videos there. So Dara, I was wondering, it's a huge commitment of time, and while this series is at a very reasonable price point, it's got to be said, considering how big it is, it's also a lot of money for recreational players, even mid-tier professionals, to pony up that much. I know you haven't watched it yet, but we know Pads well. We've done strategy segments with them. We know what a good communicator he is. What's your hunch about Pads as it is being branded? Do you think it's worth the investment?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be easily worth the investment, at least for people who play enough. Like it's Pads. I mean, we all know Pads. He's an absolute workhorse, a workaholic. But when he's grinding, like he really goes full at it. But he also puts in. He has an incredible study ethic, and you talked there about how he takes off months to mainly study. And that's basically what's pushed him to the absolute elite levels. I'm not surprised he's put so much into the course. Pads really doesn't do anything by half measures. It's very much in his personality that once he decides to do something, he commits fully to it. And yeah, I think it's going to be, I expect it to be an absolutely amazing course. I've actually been watching his Instagram stories recently, and he gives a flavor of that. He does a hand of the day every day on his Instagram story, and he's an extremely good communicator, which is important as well. Like, you know, there are some elite players I could think of who might put out something like this, but I don't think it would be as good because they probably wouldn't communicate it as well. I think this is pitched at kind of pro level, if I'm honest. That's not to say that some very talented recreational players won't buy it and benefit from it, but I think that's the level. Yeah, I think it's a very, very exciting development.
Yeah, Pat said to me that he had basically only played Sundays for the last 16 or 17 weeks and was putting all his other time into this, maybe 50, 60 hours a week into making these videos, you know, preparing them, making them really slick, getting the right people involved, because he does partner up for different videos, I think, as well. Marty, have you ever taken that sort of approach where maybe you just play the big Sunday grind? Or I remember back in the old days, people used to do Tuesdays and Sundays because they were the kind of really good days if you were playing a bit higher, but then they take the days off in between to maybe study or do something around poker that wasn't specifically playing.
So I agree on Pads. Never miss a Sunday. I can count on one hand the amount of Sundays I've missed in the last decade where I wasn't like in a live tournament. I do all my travel based around Sundays. Like I don't miss a Sunday of poker. So, but I also, I'm not as liberal taking off the other days or not playing the other days. I probably have averaged like 5.5 days like per week for the last like playing. There's obviously study time before or after, but I find myself, other than like vacations or time that I take off, I find myself pretty fully immersed every day, either playing or studying in some way. The course seems pretty exciting. I'm not a big fan in general of poker video content. It hasn't been a good way for me to learn. It's different for everyone. I think for $700 though, considering what else I've seen on the market in terms of videos, like Pads is a sick player, and I think you could really learn a lot from it. Does seem pretty exciting for someone that likes to learn in that way.
It's very interesting for me to hear you say that you're not a fan of videos, because there is a sort of a orthodoxy in poker where everything has to be a video, and people are actually quite poo-poo of other content. Like what works better for you, or has worked in the past?
Just my own work, just going through solves. So I'm a kind of believer in the idea that there's a certain failure in teaching that like you really can't transfer knowledge. It's something you kind of have to discover for yourself. And that's kind of the way I approach things. Like I haven't really learned it until I learn it. So I just, it's hard for me to like value someone else's opinion on a matter if I don't know it to be true. And obviously I know people in videos, they work with solvers, they show their work, that kind of thing. But like my own discovery is, I think there's some value in that teaching just doesn't give me. or like that kind of instruction doesn't give me.
Yeah, I must say I'm quite similar too. I do watch videos often just to see what other people are doing, but for me the main benefit I've often got from videos is like a guy will say something and I'll think, oh, that's really interesting, but then I'll go off and spend 10 or 20 hours with the solvers actually investigating it myself. Yeah. And I find I learn much more from that when I actually like say, okay, well, what if it's an ace high board? What if it's a Jack 7-5 board, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I'm very much in that camp as well.
So the thing is for me though, I'm playing so often, I don't necessarily think I need to hear a lot of other people's questions or what they think. I have more marked hands than I know what to do with. I probably have like 82 windows of MS Paint open when I'm taking screenshots on Party or GG Poker because I don't have the hand histories.
Yeah, they're making it hard.
And they just pile up and it just takes forever to go through them. And like, for me, that's just been the best way to learn. And I know people have different methods, but yeah.
Yeah, just
I haven't seen a training video, I think probably since like 2013. I think the last training video I watched was like some Lafort stuff on Run It Once. It was quite good.
Well, that's a blast from the past. You know, it does feel like it's a bit of a boom time for all those kind of training materials. I don't know if that's a kind of a COVID thing where maybe some of these elite players decided, well, I don't want to really grind full time, or at least maybe they got browned off a bit like some of us when they're just never ending big tournament series that were online for a while and just thought maybe I'll do something a bit different. Of course, Dominic Nietzsche, who we all know from DTO as well, he's just released the DTO Super High Roller edition, which is like really advanced stuff, and he's also got the pre-flop ranges in there, which he jokingly said to me, he said, yeah, I just wanted to put them out there at a really cheap price point because fuck all those guys who are charging loads of money for pre-flop ranges.
$3,000 for a bunch of charts is a bit much.
He's a funny guy, Dom. And then, of course, word is Nick Petrangelo is working on a very big cash game series for Upswing, which, of course, you know, he put out one of the elite tournament courses a couple of years ago with Upswing, or maybe it was a year and a half ago. And yeah, I imagine that's going to be absolutely brilliant too. So loads of great stuff out there for people who do like to consume all that content. Speaking of Upswing, Dara, we dropped a strategy video, I want to say a year ago, featuring Jamie Kerstetter, and that has just gone out on Upswing in sort of written form by me, and then obviously it gives it a little bump to our video, which, by the way, you can check out on this YouTube channel. The topic, if you like, or one of the themes within that hand was scared money. And I was interested, both of you, have either of you ever been scared money? Maybe, Marty, do you want to go first?
There's a few times I've been scared money, but the time I think of the most is like following my high school graduation, my friend's parents his grandparents to celebrate. We were both 18. We went out on one of those like offshore gambling boats where you go out for the night. It's offshore, so you can drink when you're under 21. They have drinks on the boat and they have some gambling. And I was 18 years old. I took the only $300 I had and I went and I sat at a 2-5 table. And I was scared, like folding, waiting for my spot, and hit a set, got sucked out and losing $300. And I was scared money to get it in with a set versus straight draw. Like I was still just like feeling dead. And oh man, it was crazy. Like I could still remember that feeling of losing it all too, and just going and sitting at penny slots drinking Long Island iced teas. It just wasn't a good feeling.
I'm just picturing that now. It's amazing. But it's interesting you plucked a hand from early on, because I think that can often be the case with the guys who, you know, have been there playing for millions of dollars. It's often by the time they reach that point, they're very good at sort of detaching themselves from the value of the money. They're basically playing the poker game in front of them, and I guess maybe afterwards realize and go, oh shit, I was playing for quite a lot, or oh, that was quite a big flip as it turned out. Dara, did you have any occasion like that on the way up where you felt like, oh, ooh, this is a little bit spicy?
Not really, I have to say. That might be partly because I've never played like super high, and therefore never had the opportunity to feel scared. But having said that, I mean, I have played a couple of 25Ks, and I did find that, you know, didn't bother me in the slightest what the stakes were.
I bought a piece of them, and I think I was scared money on your behalf. I think my 500 quid or whatever little small bit I had was scared.
I remember sending you hands, and you were saying, "Yeah, I don't know. I think I might have folded there. It's a 25." But I think the nearest I've had to it, like my journey into poker was, I was obviously somewhat independently successful before I had a good career and I had a decent amount of money. So poker sort of became the job by accident. But I already had like decent resources. It wasn't the case that like if I lost my poker bankroll, I was bust or anything like that. But that said, I made a rather disastrous investment decision after my first Vegas, I think. Yeah, my first Vegas was my first ever losing trip. First time I lost money in poker. And I came home, and my wife, she said, like, how did it go? And I said, well, we lost 25 grand. And she was like, oh my God, that's terrible. Like, I didn't know you could actually lose money at poker. Is that a thing? So I was speaking to an English friend who was a pro at the time about it. And he said, well, okay, to put a reminder at ease, what you should do is take half of your bankroll and invest it in something really safe. So she knows that that's there, and that no matter what, you're going to have made money from poker, even if you lose the other half. So I said, fine, I'll do that. So I put it into what I thought was the safest of safe shares, Anglo-Irish Bank.
No.
I went all in an Anglo-Irish Bank. A year later, those shares were worth zero. Like, I literally thought, like, there's no way a bank can go bust. That's just not a thing. But it was. And during that year, I also experienced my first online downswing. So I actually had a period where my online roll had dipped down to about 10K. And at that stage, my life's expenses were about 10K a month. So I do remember this period of, I don't know how long it was, maybe 6 to 9 months, where I was grinding sit and goes at the time. And I get to the end of the month and I'd have 12K or whatever online. And then all the bills would come in and I'd have to take 10K off, and I'd be back down to 2K, and I'd be like, shit, I got to get this to 10K by the end of the month again. And there was this huge stress for about 6 or 9 months. I managed to keep doing it, and then I did transition across to MTTs, and that went very well. But I wasn't exactly scared money, but I was very stressed money in that period.
Thank you for sharing that. That's I do remember you telling me that before, but yeah, no, it's never nice to recall those kinds of moments. But I think it is a interesting story for people to know in your background. I think people probably always have the assumption that Dara O'Kearney sort of started from free rolls and then became a millionaire very quickly. But there was at least a few bumps, even if they did come from the investments. And you talk about cowboys at the poker table, the cowboy bank that Anglo-Irish was. My God. Yeah,
I used to tell people that, like, people used to say, like, were you never afraid you were going to lose it all from poker? And I said, no, I made it all from poker. I lost it gambling recklessly on bank shares.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, I have a piece of good news, Dara, because I know this was a story that we were all getting very sick of. Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu is over. It's done. We never have to talk about it again.
Well, that's why there's literally no news in poker. Like, there's literally nothing happening. People are wandering around. They don't know what to talk about.
Nobody knows what to do. Well, I have some news for those people. There is another heads up challenge in the works. So I'm going to read from some notes here because it kind of went back and forth and there was a bit of chatter. Hellmuth versus Negreanu. Tony G is also in the wings somehow. High stakes duel 2, Hellmuth v Negreanu seems to be booked, or at least like to be decided dates wise. Brett Hanks announced it on that new show, No Gamble, No Future, that they had sort of agreed upon doing it. I guess it's going to look like the Antonio Esfandiari match that Hellmuth had a couple of months ago. It all started when Hellmuth, this was very funny, expressed disappointment in Negreanu's performance against Doug Polk, despite watching zero hands. Negreanu obviously fired back, saying Phil Hellmuth's talking out of his ass. Pretty reasonable, and suggesting that they settle matters on the felt. Not to be outdone, Tony G jumped in the mix and tweeted that he was the one who wanted a piece of Hellmuth. Obviously, they've had a bit of history over the years. Well, a couple of nights ago, Negreanu appeared on that Poker Go show I mentioned there, No Gamble, No Future, to confirm that they are going to play him and Hellmuth. These two icons of the game are going to battle it out in a similar kind of format where I guess it's really like a very slow moving tournament where they sort of play really, really deep. I think they might start like 400 deep and it creeps up, but it's heads up. So they do finish it eventually in one night. Looking ahead to the contest, Negreanu said, and this was actually a pretty good read, I got to say, Phil is the most extreme exploitative player I've ever seen, and it works because people make big mistakes against him that I won't be making. Phil in the past has rejected that assessment of his game, of course, because he invented GTO, apparently. That's a direct quote from him. Dara, it does seem that whenever he talks about GTO, Phil does sort of reveal that he doesn't fundamentally understand what it means.
Yeah, I have heard Daniel tell a story of where Phil asked him what GTO was, and Daniel was obviously quite surprised that Phil hadn't heard this term or didn't know what it was. And once it was explained to him, Phil decided that he had invented GTO. So he went from sort of like not knowing what it was to having invented it in a remarkably fast period. So I mean, I haven't been following the story as closely as you. So essentially, it's a heads up, sit and go, is it?
Yes, it's a very deep stacked, slow moving heads up, sit and go. Exactly.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Who do you think will win, Marty?
So I have an important question. Is Hellmuth allowed to limp, or like is limping allowed?
Yes, limping is definitely allowed in that format. Yeah. So, but then of course Daniel will have to take 20 seconds on every decision afterwards, as per his usual style these days.
Anything can happen in one heads up, sit and go. I would say Negreanu has a small edge, but if it's just one heads up, sit and go, I'm going to put some money on White Magic, baby.
Yeah, very nice.
I think Negreanu's the better bet, but I'll bet on Hellmuth I'll put a small sweat on it, but not like I would put anything big on it. But I would love to root for Hellmuth in a heads up, sit and go.
Well, it does feel like Daniel needs a win right now, and I guess maybe he feels like he's got the right opponent for somebody he feels he has the better of. But yeah, I agree with you. Like particularly in a one game, like even if he has an edge, he's probably got like a 52-48 edge or something. It's not going to be much.
I think they'll sit and go.
Yeah, I mean, I specialized in heads up sit and goes for a while, but basically when they were introduced for the first time ever on iPoker, the Euro network, and there was a period at the start where we were all printing money, even though they were super turbos. We were able to win about 65% of them, which shouldn't really be a thing. But by the end, like very, very quickly, our edges were down to 52, 53 into sort of like you need rake back territory now. I kind of feel, okay, it's a slower structure, but I mean, Phil's whole style is that even if he's going to leak equity when it's deep, it'll be very, very slowly. He'll do it. He'll leak small amounts of equity here and there, but he won't make absolutely massive mistakes, I don't think. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be similar. I'd probably think that Daniel's a 53% favorite, which was kind of the edges and those things. I do think, like, as well, heads up sitting goes up and come down to short stacks. Phil's short stack game used to get criticized for years, but actually he was doing a lot of stuff back in the day, which the solvers now tell us is not only fine, but is actually good. So I think he kind of has a decent intuitive understanding of that stuff. He's done some really funky stuff down the years. I mean, we may remember a hand from the WPT where he limped on the button, I think, off 3.5 big blinds and folded to a shove. But again, you know, often Phil has done things which people have like gone like, well, that's clearly bad because they were against the paradigm of the day, and they've actually turned out to be fine.
Well, I suppose it just all depends on how far back it was that he invented the GTO, and you know now that obviously
maybe he'll upgrade it as well.
Yeah, GTO plus. He has used the phrase GTO plus, which is
I've told the story before, but I have had the experience of trying to coach an older live player who was an absolute legend in GTO, and it was incredibly frustrating. All he wanted to do was try to figure out how to beat GTO. It didn't matter how many times I tried to explain Nash equilibrium and unexploitable to him. He was like, "Yeah, but what can we do? Like, we know what they're doing. They don't know what we're doing." It was like, it doesn't work like that.
Can't believe you've outed Andy Black on our show like that, Dara. Lots of love, Andy, I promise. One thing I wanted to get both your takes on with this stuff, because it sort of occurs to me, and it's not a bad idea actually, I kind of like this, is that poker is starting, at least from a promotional point of view or a hype point of view, it started to take a leaf out of the book of pro wrestling. It's more like WWE. There's another guy waiting on the wings. He wants to get you if you beat the other fella. There's smack talk. There's sort of these little videos that everyone can do. And I actually kind of like it. I got to be honest. I kind of feel like it's really hard to sort of capture poker because it's all different governing bodies. We're all sole traders. There's different brands. There's different formats. So it's all so diffuse. So a little bit of this kind of thing in a way to almost bring a spotlight or a focus on two players is something you can do, and you can create animosity this way. And of course, if the Doug Polk Daniel Negreanu match didn't teach us anything else, it taught us that actually when there's genuine animosity there, it engages everybody, because everybody sort of hated one of them, maybe more so than liked either of them. And I thought that made for a more compelling drama. I was sucked in by it absolutely myself. So I suppose with that in mind, maybe Marty, go first. Is there anything to what I'm saying in this regard? I suppose what I feel is most happening here is we're going to find out now with this one whether sort of staged animosity is going to do the same trick.
I think Doug versus Daniel was kind of a unicorn, and people actually cared about it. They've had a long, like you said, like the wrestling aspect they bring to poker is what made it exciting. It's why we had a big betting market on it. It's why there was so much liquidity there. I find it hard to really care about one heads up sit and go between Negreanu and Hellmuth. I get that there's a wide appeal to that. And maybe the format is more watchable. We can see the whole cards. There's a lot of ways the challenge can be more viewable. But it doesn't necessarily mean I care about it as much, or like there's other challenges that are being pushed. It's like, I don't know why I'm supposed to care about Landon Tice playing Bill Perkins. Like, I don't know how many months it's going to take. Landon Tice seems like a nice kid. Bill Perkins seems like a nice guy, you know, but there's no animosity there. They're laying in price. Like there's just no engagement there for me. And it just seems like really hard to follow. I think these like short kind of matches, or maybe like people have been talking about team matches. If you could kind of get this squad versus squad thing, or get people with a real beef with each other, or you get Doug Polk and Bryn Kinney playing heads up for $10 million, like, you know, like maybe.
Yeah, well, I would certainly tune into that one as well. Before I come to you, Dara, to get your take on that sort of wrestling style hype machine, are there any other unicorns, Marty, like apart from Polk, Bryn, that you would watch?
I'm trying to think, like, so basically heads up poker was dead before this. I haven't heard people talk about heads up for rolls in the last 5 years, you know, like there hasn't been any talk of any kind of big heads up grudge matches. So I don't even know who plays that heads up, who's going to play heads up against each other. Now we got people laying 9 big blind handicaps. Like it's hard to say. I think it's Doug versus Daniel is a unicorn in the sense that something like that's probably never going to happen again.
Yeah, I suppose years in the making is a hard thing to replicate across a couple of mean-spirited tweets and a couple of interviews. Doesn't really do it's not the campaign against Negreanu that Polk waged for so many years. Dara, on the sort of hype machine stuff, like one, do you agree that that's what's going on right now? Because I think it feels like that's what's happening. And two, do you think it's good, or do you think it's just a bit naff and ultimately will be seen through pretty quickly?
Yeah, first of all, I agree that it is what's happening. Secondly, I do sort of have a pretty different view on you for this thing. I don't really see much good in it, to be honest. I do see that obviously when you look at Twitter and you look at all the people you follow, the poker players, they do all seem to be engaging with it and talking about it, etc. It's easy to sort of over extrapolate from that and think, well, everybody thinks that that's a great idea now and this is great for poker and lots of attention, etc. But I'm not convinced it's actually getting new people in, and I'm not even convinced that in terms of attracting new people, this is a good way to do it. I think a lot of the people who, you know, the people who play poker got in at a time where this was a fairly common thing. So it's not surprising to me that they kind of this appeals to them, because it's kind of like a return to the old animosities that you had when you had players. But the people who don't play poker, a lot of them don't play because they see poker as too brash. They're a little bit timid about going into casinos. They're worried about losing their money online. They have all sorts of concerns. And I actually think this might make things worse. They might think, well, it's all just loudmouths, you know, calling each other out, and it's not a particularly welcoming environment. There's a lot of talk in poker about the demographics that are very underrepresented. Older people don't tend to play online poker very much. They're far more represented in live poker. Females are the opposite. Females play more online than live. But I don't think, again, if I'm thinking about either of these demographics, I don't see how this appeals to them. So I think if you zoom out and think about how it makes poker look, I mean, I don't think making poker into wrestling is going to get everybody suddenly playing poker.
I suppose maybe it's the screenwriter in me that just feels like conflict is the major source of engagement and drama. And
but like, have you ever got into a wrestling ring?
No.
Yeah.
No, but I don't mean that. I just mean that it's storylines. It's like
yeah, I know it's storylines, but what I'm saying is like it might be an interesting story, but I don't think it will actually encourage people to play poker in the same way that like we like to watch wrestling on TV, but that doesn't make us all go off and join our local wrestling club.
But we like to watch MMA on the telly, or I don't really, but like some people do, and they wouldn't think about getting into that kind of ring either. Like, but it does engage because it just feels a bit more like it's got a bit of an angle or an edge. I don't know. Look, I think that's a great counterpoint, to be honest. And I think you made it very well. And I suppose maybe a question for you guys out there, the audience, leave it in the comments who you agree with on that one. Do you think it's good for the game to have this little bit of a needle and it sort of engages people, it makes them interested? Or do you agree with Dara that actually it's putting off far more people and maybe long term is worse for the game? Would be keen to hear your opinions on that. Marty, I wanted to bring up a subject that's not poker, and I think I might be right in saying that this is something that you know a decent amount about, probably more than either Dara or I. So we'll let you lead the way on this one. Bitcoin at the time of recording has, obviously skyrocketed over the last several months. I think it's at about $55 or $55,000 right now. By the time, who knows? By the time this airs, maybe it'll be $100,000 or $5,000. So either
or it could be like Dara's bank shares.
yeah, exactly. Just gone, and it's gone. But it's been surging in the last few months, no question. Obviously, Elon Musk getting involved has sort of put a facade of sort of high-end business legitimacy into the equation, which people feel like might bring more big players in finance and in industry into the fold. What's your take on it all? And are we kind of maybe at one of those classic Bitcoin tops where it now will kind of collapse quite badly and sharply, but then rebuild quite nicely again a year or two from now?
So I've been involved with Bitcoin for a long time. I started using it, I would say, relatively early. First time I was introduced to Bitcoin was probably around 2013. I used it for various things. I studied economics in school, and the sad part was I was busto in makeup. Like I didn't have any money back then. But like Bitcoin immediately like piqued my intellectual interest in terms of like the network that it was building, what it was trying to do, and just the idea of like censorship resistant money. And so for me, it was always like this thought experiment, and I was obsessed with Bitcoin. Dove in pretty hard in terms of studying, going to meetups, networking with people in the industry. At no point did I think that something like this, we always joked like, oh, like 10K or like 20K or like new all-time high. But like now that we're here, it doesn't even feel like a reality almost. Like it's almost like a reality that was never planned for. But if we're looking everything that's happening, I still feel like so incredibly bullish. The network has exploded. It's done exactly what it's supposed to do. It's and just everything that it has enabled. If you even look within the poker industry, you guys probably don't play on the Bitcoin facing sites.
I do.
If you look at the growth of not just Winning Poker Network, because obviously they're the main one. They signed Moneymaker. They're running these huge Venoms. But over the course of like the quarantine, I've seen sites like Bet Online and Bodog. They've just grown like 200-300% in like the player, like the prize pools, the players. Like even GG Poker, I'd assume a good bit of their success is on the backbone of like Bitcoin enabling like this liquidity and being able to put money on. And it's at this point, it's hard to be like too focused on the price when you have like, you have Bitcoin money and you have Bitcoin, like the underlying technology. And so many things are being built on top of this, and it's enabling new ecosystems. it's just the same way the internet allowed us to be able to play online poker, like a profession that didn't exist a decade prior. I think Bitcoin will enable some new kinds of work, or it enables a new future, and we're watching that unfold in front of us. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. It leaves me speechless, basically. It's crazy.
Dara, I know you obviously there. You mentioned there that you do play on ACR, and that does mean that you showed me your little gizmo that your bitcoins are inside, or I assume that's right. It's like the device if the internet is here. Like this is the
Trezor.
Yeah, exactly. You got your little. He'll pull it out now, I'm sure. But here we go, Dara. Go on, say something so they see you.
This is my Trezor, yeah. Yeah, I mean, my experience. I basically had stopped playing on ACR because the methods that I used to deposit, NetTeller, etc., they stopped supporting them. So I just kind of said, okay, well, won't play there anymore. I ended up having some money there because I was coaching some American, and the only way they could send me the money seemed to be ACR. So I had a small amount of money sitting on ACR. And then when we actually had Phil Nagy on the chip race, and he was talking about Bitcoin, I thought, okay, well, maybe actually this might be the chance to join the Bitcoin revolution. So I basically started playing with the money I had on ACR, spun up a few grand and cashed it out to my newly minted Trezor. I was convinced at the start that it was a scam, because the first time I tried to withdraw, I foolishly thought it has to be instantaneous because it's electronic. So I had like my Trezor in, I copied across all the stuff that I needed. I did my cash out, no sign of the money on Trezor, and I was like, it's gone. That's it. It's just lost. I contacted ACR support. They said, no, the money definitely went. I went back to my Trezor. It still wasn't there. I was like, okay, it's sitting somewhere on the blockchain. I'm never going to see it again.
Nagy's taking it. He's pocketed it. Run away.
Yeah. And then, but a week later, I did try again, and it had showed up. So I was like, okay, so it's not instantaneous. That's what the issue is. So I cashed out a decent amount. Left myself enough to play. And again, like, obviously I'm a total Bitcoin noob. There was a period where I wasn't playing too much, and then I went back to playing, and I needed to redeposit on ACR. So I went to my Trezor and I like plugged it in. I was like, that's a lot more money than I cashed out. What's going on here? It was a real sort of like stark how volatile this thing is. It was like, how this looks like double what I cashed out. How has this happened? So yeah, at the moment I'm very bullish on Bitcoin, despite knowing pretty much nothing about it.
Well, of course, that's the thing. But Doug actually made the point. Now, I think he may have been hedged to some extent, but he made the point that he withdrew Bitcoin, or he gave away Bitcoin to get the cash for the challenge to put it onto WSOP.com to play Daniel. And even though he won 1.2 million off Daniel, if he'd never played him and the challenge never happened and that money stayed in Bitcoin, it would have done better.
Wow.
Yeah, it's tough to like look back at things like that, or decisions you make. Like, well, if I would have just bought Bitcoin, like, you'll just warp your entire mentality if you frame everything like that.
It's funny Marty mentioned my previous bank shares, because I was talking to this recently about a young poker player who, like every other young poker player with a bit of money now, wants to get into Bitcoin. And I was saying, like, first of all, I'm not the right person to be talking to about this, because I really don't know anything about it. But like, just do be careful, because I do remember other bubbles, and not just in crypto, but in property, etc. It's not necessarily the case that if you diversify into Bitcoin that you're suddenly a lot safer. It's still very volatile. It trades more like a commodity than a currency. But yeah, I mean, it's very hard to argue against Bitcoin right now.
My basic advice to people who might listen to this, who are newer to Bitcoin and thinking about buying it for the first time, I would suggest that first you learn about Bitcoin, read the white paper. It's 9 pages. It's not very technical, in all honesty. You should at least try to understand what you're investing in, and then decide how much money you want to invest. And I recommend dollar cost averaging. You're not smart enough to try to time the market. So maybe you buy at a high price, maybe you buy at a low price, but just space those buys out, maybe every week or every month, until you invest the total amount that you wanted to invest to begin with, and just keep adding. But don't try to FOMO in and just like make a big buy all at once because you feel like, oh, it might double. Like I always just recommend people to dollar cost average, learn about what they're investing in. get your coins off exchanges, take self-custody. Bitcoin is meant to be like, you're meant to be in possession of your Bitcoin. So I never recommend really keeping it on a centralized like third exchange. And like, it's like Bitcoin is personal responsibility. It's taking control of your money. And if you want to be serious about that, like that's what I suggest people to do.
No, it's a really good bit of crypto bankroll management there, which I'm sure people will benefit from. So thank you for that, Marty. I actually have one very good friend who was the first person to mention Bitcoin to me. It was about maybe 8-9 years ago, whatever it was, really, really early on. Like, I mean, it was like cents at the time. And he bought like 10 Bitcoins or whatever it was. And then he just left them in a computer. They were stuck on the computer. It ended up in the apartment of his girlfriend. He broke up with that girlfriend. Thought, fuck that, who cares? And then as the prices kept going up and as each of these bubbles would happen, I'm like, have you called her yet? Like, do you think it's now worth? And he's like, no, it's not worth fucking 20 grand. I'd not going back into that world. I couldn't bear it. And now I'm looking at him going, you might have like 300 or 400K in that, like in that apartment now. Would you not just call and find out if that laptop exists or whatever it was? Yeah, but I imagine there are people, I've heard rumors that there are people like digging up landfills to try and find computers that had like 50 Bitcoins on them.
So I have a question for you guys. So do both of you own some Bitcoin?
I do now, yeah.
So from the time you heard about it until, it took me about 3 years from the time I heard about it until like the time I bought it. That's such a long time, but I was just curious how long it took for you guys.
It was long. Like literally, my first Bitcoin was an ACR cash out a few months ago, and the only reason it happened was I had money on ACR, and that seemed to be the only way to get it out. But that money had come, somebody had made a transfer to me on ACR. So it's kind of similar to my overall poker career. Like I never made a deposit on a site. I started playing free rolls and everything spun up from that. I'm kind of trying to do the same again with Bitcoin, I guess, where I'm going to just spin up from $120 that a guy sent me for an hour of coaching. And yeah, maybe 3 years from now, I'll have a few million in Bitcoin. That would be nice.
Stay out of my ACR sit and goes, please. It's a great way to dollar cost average.
Right.
Well, look, as is the custom now in 2021, we are going to finish with a Dara O'Kearney strategy tidbit. These have proved very popular. I've heard very good things that people are already picking up these little nuggets of advice from you, Dara. So what have you got in store for us this week?
Yeah, the main strategy tidbit that this week I'm just going to say is that like a sort of a function of post-flop play is that anytime you have a flop, I talked about how, the flop is either good for your range, bad for your range, and then relative to your opponent's range. But when a flop is good for your range, but there are a lot of cards to come on the next street that will devalue it, that's the time to sort of up your bet sizing and start shoveling money in. And, people often focus overly, I think, on flush draws, but even, a board like Jack 7-5, which has has a couple of straight draws, but lots of gut shots as well. That's a kind of board where you should actually be over betting a lot more than you think on the flop.
Very nice. Do you agree with that, Marty?
Over betting on Jack 7-5?
Yeah.
This seems reasonable.
Good stuff.
I don't do a lot of flop over betting in general. I know it's a thing, but I always just remove that tree whenever I'm running things. I just sort of incorporate it to my game. Do you find yourself doing it often, Dara?
It's something that I've only really started in the last few months. I was playing around with the solvers and I was playing around with different bet sizings, and I found that like at 40 big blinds and above, there's a lot of spots where if you give the solver all the options, it only wants to use two options: min bet and over bet, which is kind of freaky when you think about it. But I kind of like it as a strategy. It's like, okay, what are the types of boards that this happens on, and how do I split between those two ranges? And I also feel that like everybody's used to playing against the third pot c-bet now. So from that perspective, it's sort of good to mix things.
Yeah, it's also good to see, because it's good to know how to play against, because like first couple of times you come across it catches you off guard.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that is the beauty of poker these days, is that like people are sort of becoming too standardized maybe on the street, certainly at mid stakes anyway. And if you can learn, particularly if it's they're solver approved moves like this, you do throw a spanner in the works for a lot of people who just don't really, it's like computer doesn't compute for them in the moment. Dara, thank you so much for that. I'm sure people will benefit from it hugely. They'll be thinking about their Jack 7-5s much more deeply. Marty Mathis, it has been wonderful to talk to you as usual. I hope you will be back on the other show maybe in the near future too. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been a fun morning.